Here is part 1, written according to your specifications. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The piano sat in the corner of the rehearsal hall, a big, black, quiet beast. This was where he always was, in that corner. His name was Leo, and for 23 years, he had been the backup pianist for the city's community symphony. He was the man you called when you needed someone who wouldn't miss a note, wouldn't fight for the spotlight, and would show up early to every single rehearsal. He was reliable. He was part of the scenery. That evening, the scenery had a new centerpiece. Her name was Elena Volkov, a violinist with a name people knew. She was a guest soloist, flying in for this one special performance. Her reputation was a heavy thing. Words like prodigy and virtuoso followed her in reviews. She carried her violin case like it was made of glass and history, and she had a way of looking at the music stand that made everyone else feel like they were in her way, that Leo watched her from his corner as the musicians tuned up. The air was different when a soloist like her was around. The usual easy jokes among the cellists were gone. The first violins sat up straighter. Even the maestro, a normally cheerful man, kept clearing his throat and adjusting his baton. Leo's job was simple. Accompany. Don't lead. Follow. Support. Be the foundation, not the decoration. He was good at being a foundation. His hands, which looked more like a carpenter's than a concert pianist's, rested on his knees. He waited. The piece was a difficult arrangement of a violin concerto. It was full of storm and drama, but also had these moments of incredible quiet sadness. The rehearsal began. From the very first sweep of her bow, Elena was technically perfect. Every note was a sharp, clear diamond. Her fingers flew over the strings with a speed that was almost frightening. She hit the high, punishing passages without a flinch, but as Leo played his part underneath hers, something felt cold. The music was supposed to be a story, but her playing felt like someone reading a dictionary. All the right words, in the right order, with no feeling behind them. Her notes were perfect, but they lived alone. They didn't connect to each other, or to his piano, or to the room. Leo did what he always did. He tried to help. When her phrases were too short and sharp, he let his chords ring out a little longer, to give them a place to land. When the music called for a sigh, he softened his touch, hoping she would hear it and soften hers. He was building a bridge of sound for her to walk on, but she wasn't looking down. She was just marching forward. Halfway through, the maestro stopped them. He tapped his stand with his baton. Elena, it's very precise, he said, choosing his words like he was walking on eggshells. She lowered her violin. Precise is the minimum requirement, she said, her voice cool. It had a faint accent, turning the words into something crisp and formal. Yes, of course, the maestro said. But this section here, he pointed to a page in the score, it's not a race. It's a memory. It should feel older, sadder. Elena's jaw tightened, just a little. She nodded once, a sharp movement. I understand the tempo marking. It's not about the tempo, Leo said. The words were out of his mouth before he could think. He never spoke up. He was the furniture. Both Elena and the maestro turned to look at him. He felt his neck grow warm. What is it about, then? Elena asked. It wasn't a friendly question. Leo swallowed. He looked at his hands on the keys. It's about the space between the notes, he said, his voice quieter. You're playing the notes beautifully, but the hurt is in the silence just after. You have to let us hear that silence. The rehearsal hall went quiet. A trumpet player shifted in his seat. Elena stared at him, her face unreadable. For a second, he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, not anger, but something like panic. Then it was gone, covered over by that cool, polished mask. Thank you for the insight, she said, her tone making it clear it was not a thank you. She raised her violin back to her chin. "Shall we continue from the Allegro, maestro?" They finished the run-through. It didn't get better. If anything, it got more tense. Leo kept playing his part, pouring all the feeling he could into the piano lines, trying to fill the emotional hole in the middle of the music. It was like throwing cotton balls into a canyon. You never heard them land. Finally, it was over. The last note faded. The maestro put down his baton and rubbed his forehead. He looked tired. "Better?" he lied. "But tomorrow, for the performance, we must find the heart. The heart is missing. Get some rest." The musicians began to pack up, the noise of cases clicking open and shut filling the room. Elena didn't say a word to anyone. She wiped her violin with a fierce, quick motion, placed it in its case, and snapped the latches shut. She picked up her bag and her ornate, leather-bound folder of sheet music, and walked out of the hall, her heels clicking a sharp, lonely rhythm on the floor. Leo stayed in his corner. He always helped straighten the chairs. As he was pushing a stand back, he saw it. On the floor, next to his piano bench, was Elena's music folder. She must have put it down when she was talking to the maestro, and forgotten it in her hurry to leave. He picked it up. It was heavy, the leather worn soft at the corners. He knew he shouldn't open it. It was private. A musician's score was like their diary. But the rehearsal had been so hollow, so strangely sad. He was curious. What did a perfect musician write in the margins? Reminders about fingering? Bow technique? He opened it. The pages were covered in her neat, slanted handwriting. But it wasn't technical notes. Scrawled next to a furious run of 16th notes, it said, "Asterisk, don't rush." He always said don't rush. In the margin of the quiet, slow movement, the one they had butchered, she had written, over and over, "Breathe. Just breathe. Why can't you breathe?" Asterisk, and then, at the top of the page, in letters that were pressed so hard they had nearly torn the paper, was the phrase that made Leo's own breath catch. Asterisk for Papa, in the hospital. Play it for him. Play the memory, not the notes. Asterisk, he snapped the folder shut, his heart pounding as if he'd read a secret he was never meant to know. Suddenly, the cold performance, the sharp words, the panic in her eyes, it all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense. This wasn't about being perfect for the audience or for the critics. This was a desperate, trembling offering for a sick father, and the pressure was crushing her. He stood there in the now empty hall, the folder in his hands. The grand piano loomed beside him, silent. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was filled with the echo of a struggle he hadn't understood until now. He was just the backup pianist, a piece of the scenery. But he was holding the key to the soloist's prison in his hands. He didn't know what to do with it. The performance was tomorrow night. Leo held the leather folder. It felt heavy now, like it was full of lead instead of paper. He looked at the door where she had left. The smart thing, the professional thing, would be to take it to the symphony office. They could call her hotel. That would be clean and simple, but he couldn't stop thinking about the words. Play the memory, not the notes. He let out a long breath, the sound loud in the empty hall. His own father had loved music. He remembered him humming along to old records, his voice rough but always on key. Leo had played for him at his bedside, too, near the end. Simple songs. It hadn't been about being perfect. It had been about filling a quiet room with something warm. He tucked the folder under his arm, turned off the main lights, and walked out into the backstage area. It was a maze of corridors and storage rooms, all painted a dull gray. He thought he heard a sound, a sniffle, maybe, or a shaky breath. It came from the direction of the instrument lock-up, a small room where valuable gear was kept overnight. He walked slowly, his old shoes making no noise on the concrete floor. The door to the lockup was slightly open. He peered in. She was there. Elena. She wasn't the proud soloist anymore. She was sitting on a wooden crate, her expensive dress looking out of place against the dusty cardboard. Her violin case was beside her, but she was just staring at her hands. They were shaking. She clenched them into fists, trying to make it stop, but they trembled anyway. Leo almost backed away. This was a private moment, a crack in the statue. He shouldn't be seeing this. But he was holding her music. Her secret. He knocked softly on the doorframe. She jumped, her head snapping up. When she saw it was him, a look of pure horror flashed across her face. It was the look of someone caught naked. She quickly wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist, composing her features back into that cool, distant mask. But her eyes were red. "What is it?" she asked, her voice thick. "You left this." He held out the folder, stepping into the small room. It smelled of rosin and old wood. She looked at it like it was a snake. Then she reached out and took it, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she said, the words automatic. She looked down at it, and her shoulders slumped. The mask slipped again. She knew. She knew he must have opened it to see whose it was. A long, tired silence filled the room. Leo just stood there, not knowing what to do. He wasn't good with people, especially not crying people, especially not famous crying people. "I'm sorry," he finally said, "for speaking out of turn earlier. It's not my place." She gave a short, bitter laugh that had no humor in it. "No, you were right. You were the only one who was right." She opened the folder on her lap, her fingers tracing the frantic writing in the margins. "Play the memory, not the notes. My father used to say that to me when I was a little girl, and I would get frustrated. He said music was just feeling, turned into sound." She looked up at Leo, and her gaze was clear now, and full of a pain so deep it made him ache. "He is in the hospital. A stroke. He can't speak. He can't move his right side. But they say he can hear." Her voice broke on the last word. "This concert. It was scheduled a year ago. He was so proud. He bought a new suit. Now he will listen from a hospital bed. And I can't even play it for him. I can only play the notes. The feeling is, it's stuck. I'm so angry and so scared that it's all just stuck." Leo leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. He nodded slowly. He understood being stuck. He'd been stuck in this backup role for 23 years. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because he never pushed. He never made a noise. He was stuck too. "The maestro wants heart," Elena said, mocking the word gently. "The reviewers will want passion. All I have is this fear, that it won't be good enough for him, that he will hear that I am afraid." Leo thought for a minute. "Maybe that's the heart," he said quietly. She frowned. "What?" "Maybe the heart of this piece right now isn't some perfect, pretty feeling. Maybe it's the fear, and the love that's causing the fear." He shifted his weight, feeling awkward giving a speech. "The music is sad. It's longing for something. You are longing for something. For him to be well. For him to hear you. So play that. Play the longing. Play the worry. The notes will take care of themselves." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face. "How?" she whispered. "How do you do that?" "When you play, I can hear it. I heard it today underneath me. It was like ground to stand on. How do you just feel it and play it?" Now it was Leo's turn to feel exposed. He scratched the back of his neck. "I don't know. I guess I just think of a story. a person, a place. I don't think about my fingers. He looked at her violin case. You said he loved folk melodies. From your home. A faint, real smile touched her lips for the first time. Yes, silly little tunes. He would whistle them while making breakfast. Can you hum one for me? Leo asked. She looked surprised, then shy. She hummed a few bars. It was a simple, winding melody, like a stream going down a hill. It was sweet and a little sad. Leo listened, and he walked over to an old, battered upright piano pushed against the wall of the storage room. He lifted the fallboard. The keys were yellowed. He played the melody she had hummed, slowly, with a simple harmony underneath it. The piano was out of tune, and the room was dusty, but the melody filled the space with something instantly familiar and warm. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these seemed different, not just of sadness, but of recognition, of home. That's it, she said. Her voice hushed. Leo played it again, this time letting it fade away into the quiet of the room. So in that second movement, he said, when you come in after my introduction, what if, just for a second, you aren't thinking about Sibelius or the concerto or the audience? What if you are just thinking of that melody, of him whistling, of the kitchen? Let that feeling be the first note. Then play the rest of the notes from that feeling. He closed the piano lid. It's just an idea? Elena was silent for a long time, looking at her hands again. They weren't shaking anymore. You would do that? You would. You would play your part to help me find that? That's my job, Leo said with a small shrug. I'm the backup. I'm supposed to support you. But this is different, she said. This is inside the music, not just underneath it. Leo nodded. Maybe we can try it tomorrow at the dress rehearsal. Just a small experiment. No one has to know but us. A look of profound relief washed over her face. It was as if a physical weight had been lifted. The tight, frightened look around her eyes softened. A secret, she said. A secret, he agreed. She stood up, smoothing her dress. She picked up her violin case and her folder. She looked at Leo, really looked at him, not through him like she had before. Thank you, she said. This time it meant something. What is your name? Leo. Thank you, Leo. I will see you tomorrow. She walked out of the storage room, her step a little lighter. Leo stayed behind for a moment in the quiet gloom. The out-of-tune piano seemed to hold the ghost of that simple folk song in the air. For the first time, he felt not just like a piece of the scenery for tomorrow's concert, but like he was part of its foundation. And a foundation, he knew, could change everything that was built upon it. He turned off the light and headed home, the hummed melody playing in his mind. The afternoon light was thin and pale through the high windows of the concert hall. This was the dress rehearsal. In a few hours, the audience would fill the red velvet seats, programs in hand, expecting a show. For Leo, the morning had been quiet. He had thought about the folk tune, the one Elena had hummed in the dusty storage room. While making his tea, he found himself playing the shape of it on his kitchen table with his fingers. It was a simple, honest melody. It didn't try to be impressive. It just was. When he arrived at the hall, the atmosphere was tense again, but it was a different kind of tension. Before, it had been the cold tension of a test. Now, it felt like the quiet before a storm. Elena was already on stage, warming up, but she wasn't running through the difficult passages at breakneck speed. She was playing long, slow, singing notes, listening to the sound as it filled the empty space. She saw him walk to his piano in the corner. She didn't smile, but she gave him a small, definite nod. It was a signal. The pact was still on. The other musicians filed in. The maestro took his place, looking from Elena to Leo with a curious expression. He could feel something was different, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "All right, everyone," the maestro said. "This is our last run. Let's focus on connection. Listen to each other. Pianist, a little more presence in the dialogue sections, please." Leo just nodded. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt cool and familiar. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about being invisible. He was thinking about a kitchen and a father whistling. The rehearsal began. The first movement was still Alana's Fortress. She played it with power and accuracy. But Leo listened closely. There was a new slight bend in a note here, a tiny hesitation there. It was as if she was testing the walls of the fortress, looking for a window. Then came the second movement, the andante. The slow, aching heart of the piece. It started with the piano alone. This was Leo's moment. Usually, he played this introduction as written beautifully, carefully, setting the stage. Today, he did something else. He played the first few bars as written, but then, very subtly, like a shadow passing over the sun, he wove the faintest thread of that folk melody into the harmony. It wasn't obvious. If you didn't know the tune, you might not even notice it. It was just a slight change in the color of a chord, a tender turn in the phrase. He played it looking down, his whole being focused on the sound. When he finished the introduction, he lifted his head and looked straight at Elena. She was looking back at him. Not at her violin, not at the conductor, not at some distant point in the hall. Her eyes were locked on his. In them, he saw a question, and then a recognition. She had heard it. The secret melody, their anchor. She raised her violin. She closed her eyes for a second longer than usual. And then she began to play. The sound that came out was not the perfect, icy sound from yesterday. It was warmer. It had a breath to it. It was unsure in a way that was deeply human. She was feeling her way. She played the first lyrical line, and instead of it being a solo declaration, it felt like an answer to his piano. A conversation. Leo supported her, not from below, but from within the music. When her phrase rose, he gave it a harmony that lifted it further. When it fell into sadness, his chords deepened the space around it, so the sadness had room to exist. He watched her, and she watched him. The sheet music in front of them might as well have been blank. They were playing from somewhere else. They reached the climactic middle section, where the violin cries out in a high, painful song. Yesterday, Elena had attacked it with technical fury. Today, she leaned into the pain. The note wasn't just loud. It trembled. It cracked with emotion. It was no longer the sound of a violin trying to be perfect. It was the sound of a daughter missing her father. It was fear and love and longing, all turned into sound. Leo's playing became more than accompaniment. It was an embrace. He played strong, deep notes that held her up, so she could pour every bit of that feeling out without falling apart. It was a safety net made of music. When the movement drifted to its quiet close, the last note from her violin faded into a silence that felt sacred. No one in the orchestra moved. No one coughed. The maestro's baton was held in mid-air. Forgotten. Elena slowly lowered her violin. She was breathing hard, as if she had just run a long way. Her eyes were bright, but she wasn't crying. She looked quiet, spent, and real. Leo let his hands rest in his lap. His own heart was beating fast. He had never played like that in his life. He had never been so connected to another musician. The maestro finally lowered his baton. He cleared his throat, a rough sound in the quiet. He looked from Elena to Leo, and back again. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He simply nodded, a deep, slow nod of understanding. No notes, no criticism. Just respect. He turned to the orchestra. "Take 5 minutes," he said, his voice husky. The spell broke. Musicians shifted, whispered. The flutist leaned over to the cellist and murmured something. The cellist just shook her head in amazement. Elena walked over to Leo's corner of the stage. She stopped by the piano, placing a hand on its glossy black side. "You put it in," she said softly. "The melody. Just a ghost of it," he said. It was enough. She looked at him, and a true, tired smile touched her lips. It transformed her face. "When I heard it, I was there. In the kitchen. I could smell his coffee. For a second, I wasn't afraid." "You played," Leo said. "You really played." "We did," she corrected him. Her hand was still on the piano, as if drawing strength from it. "Tonight, it will be different. The audience, the lights, the pressure will come back. I know it will." "It might," Leo admitted. He wasn't going to lie to her. "But you know the way back now. You know the map. Look at me. Listen for the anchor. We'll do it again." She took a deep, steadying breath, her gaze firm on his. "Okay," she said. "We will." She went back to her place to tune her violin, but the space around her was different. The orchestra members didn't look at her with distant awe anymore. They looked at her with a new kind of attention. They had just heard something true, and it had changed the room. Leo looked out at the empty sea of red seats. Tonight, they would be full of people expecting a performance. But he and Elena had already done the real work. They had found the music's heart, and in doing so, they had found a way to speak without words. The concert tonight was just the echo. The real conversation had already happened, here in the quiet afternoon light, between a backup pianist and a soloist who had finally stopped being perfect and started being human. The air backstage hummed with a nervous energy that was entirely different from the cold silence of the day before. Now it was the warm, buzzing tension of anticipation. Musicians in black and white moved through the narrow corridors like shadows, the scent of rosin and breath mints mixing in the air. Violins tuned, a scale running up and down. A trumpet blew a soft, muted note. Leo stood by himself in a dim corner, away from the main bustle. He was already in his simple black suit. He rotated his wrists, listening to the faint pop of his joints. He wasn't thinking about the notes. He was holding the quiet kitchen melody in his mind, keeping it safe, keeping it ready. Through the curtains, he could hear the murmur of the audience arriving, the sound of programs rustling, of seats creaking as people settled in. It was a low, gathering wave of sound. He saw Alina across the way, surrounded by a well-wisher from the symphony board. She was nodding politely, but her eyes were distant. She was holding her violin, her fingers tracing the curve of its neck over and over. When the board member left, her eyes scanned the backstage area and found Leo. She excused herself and walked over to him, the click of her heels purposeful. "The hall is full," she said, her voice low. "It usually is," Leo said, trying to sound normal. "My manager just called. My father is settled. The nurse has the radio on for him." Her jaw was tight. "He is listening." The weight of those words hung between them. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was real time. A man in a hospital bed, hundreds of miles away, waiting to hear his daughter. "Good," Leo said, because he didn't know what else to say. He met her gaze. "Remember the map. It's the same room, just darker, with more people in it. When you look for me, you'll find me." She gave a sharp, quick nod. The fear was back in her eyes, but it wasn't the frozen panic from before. It was a live wire, energy that could be used. "The folk tune," she whispered. "It's right there," he said, tapping his temple. "It's already in the piano, waiting for you." The stage manager appeared, a headset on, holding up 5 fingers. 5 minutes, people, places. The orchestra began to filter onto the stage. Leo gave Elena one last look and then walked to his spot. The grand piano was a dark island in the corner, a single spotlight making its surface gleam. He sat down, adjusting the bench. The view from here was strange. He could see the backs of the violinists, the curve of the harp, the conductor's empty podium. And beyond the edge of the stage, a vast, dark ocean of people, their faces blurred in the shadow dot. The maestro walked out to enthusiastic applause. He bowed, turned, raised his arms. The orchestra stood. More applause. Then Elena walked on dot. It was a different entrance. 2 days ago, she had marched. Yesterday, she had walked. Tonight, she moved with a calm, deliberate grace. She acknowledged the audience with a slight bow, but it wasn't for them. It felt like a ritual, a gathering of herself. She took her position. She looked once, directly at Leo, a flash of eye contact in the bright lights. Then she lifted her violin to her chin, and the hall fell silent. The first movement began. It was, as it always was, a display of formidable skill. Her technique was breathtaking, her fingers a blur. But Leo, from his corner, could hear the subtle difference. The edges were slightly softer. The fierceness had a touch of sorrow in it. She was holding back, just a little, saving the real storm for the heart of the piece. The audience listened, rapt, applauding warmly at the end of the movement. It was a successful start. Then came the pause, the silence between movements. This was always the moment Leo used to glance at his music, take a quiet breath. Tonight, he didn't look at the music. He looked at his hands. He thought of his own father's rough humming. He thought of a hospital room and a radio playing. The second movement, the maestro's baton gave him the cue. Leo's hands went to the keys. He played the opening notes, and the hall, which had been holding its breath, seemed to lean in. The piano's voice was lonely and beautiful. And then, with the lightest touch, he let the secret melody bleed into the chords. It was even softer than in rehearsal, just a haunting suggestion, a memory in musical form. He finished the introduction and lifted his head. Elena was looking at him. Not a glance, but a deep, anchoring look. The bright stage lights made her seem pale, but her eyes were dark and fixed on his. In that look, he saw her let go. She let go of the audience, of the critics, of everything but the map they had drawn together. Dot. She began to play dot, and from the very first note, everyone in the hall knew this was something else. This was not the same violinist from the first movement. The sound was not brilliant. It was alive. It had a pulse. It was tender, so tender it almost hurt to listen to. It was the sound of a private thought, shared with thousands. Leo answered her. His piano was no longer just an accompaniment. It was her shadow, her echo, her shelter. When her note quivered with emotion, his chord provided a ground for it to land on. He watched her bow, her fingers, the slight sway of her body, and he reacted not just to the notes, but to the intent behind them. They were in a world of their own, a world built on a kitchen melody and a shared understanding of fear and love. The music swelled to its painful peak. Elena's violin cried out, a high, searing line of pure longing. It was not a perfect sound. It was raw. It had cracks of humanity in it. In that moment, she wasn't a virtuoso. She was a heartbroken daughter, sending a message through the night air to her father. Leo played powerful, deep rumbles from the piano, not to cover her, but to hold the space for that immense feeling, so it wouldn't shatter. People in the audience were crying. They didn't make a sound. Tears just rolled down faces, caught in the dim light. No one moved. No one coughed. It was as if the entire hall had become one breathing creature. held captive by the story unfolding on stage. As the movement wound down to its quiet end, Elena's final note was barely a whisper, a breath across the strings. It faded into nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick and heavy and full. It was not an empty silence. It was a silence stuffed with feeling. For a long, terrible second, nothing happened. No applause. Just that stunned, reverent quiet. Leo kept his hand still on the keys. He looked at Elena. She was still hunched over her violin, her eyes closed, her bow arm trembling slightly. She was somewhere else, in that kitchen, by that hospital bed. Slowly she straightened up. She opened her eyes. They were not looking at the cheering crowd that was about to erupt. They were looking, once more, at the backup pianist in the corner, and in her gaze he saw it. Not triumph, not pride, gratitude, and a peace that had been missing before. Then the silence broke. It didn't start with applause. It started with a collective sigh, a release of breath from hundreds of people. And then the wave hit. The sound was not polite clapping. It was a roar, a physical force of appreciation. People were on their feet, not in a staged, polite standing ovation, but rising one by one, then in groups, then as a whole, compelled to stand by what they had just witnessed. But Elena, standing in the blaze of the spotlight, did not bow to them. She turned completely towards the corner of the stage. She looked right at Leo. She extended her hand toward him, a clear, graceful gesture. "You, stand with me." The spotlight, fixed on the soloist, now caught the edge of his piano and him beside it. He was no longer in the shadows. He was part of the picture. Hesitantly, Leo stood up from the bench. The roar of the crowd grew even louder. Elena placed her hand over her heart and then bowed, not to the audience, but to him. In that moment, under the heat of the lights and the thunder of the crowd, the backup pianist was not a supporting actor anymore. He had been the key, and everyone in the hall had heard it turn. The roar of the audience was a warm, living wall of sound. Leo stood beside his piano, feeling unbelievably exposed. The spotlight, which had always been a border keeping him in the dark, now held him in its circle of heat. He could see the blur of standing, clapping faces. He gave a stiff, awkward bow, his mind blank. Elena straightened from her own bow to him and finally turned to face the crowd. She smiled, but it was a tired, real smile. She held up a hand, not to silence them, but to share the acclaim, gesturing again to Leo and then to the orchestra behind her. The applause went on, a wave that refused to break. Backstage was chaos, but a happy, breathless chaos. Orchestra members clapped him on the shoulder as he came off. "Unbelievable, Leo," the principal cellist said, her eyes wide. "What was that?" "It was like you were inside her head." He just nodded, muttering thanks, and made his way through the crowd of well-wishers pressing around Elena. He needed air. He slipped out a side door into the cool, quiet night. The brick alley behind the concert hall was dark, lit by a single yellow bulb. He could still hear the muffled thunder of applause from inside. He leaned against the wall, letting the cold brick seep through his jacket, and took a deep breath. He wasn't used to being seen. For 23 years, his job was to be heard and not noticed. Tonight, he had been both. It felt good, but it also felt like wearing a shirt that was 2 sizes too small. The door opened, and Elena stepped out. She had her violin case in one hand and her coat over her arm. The noise from inside spilled out and then was cut off as the door swung shut behind her. The alley was quiet again. For a moment, they just stood there in the dim light. "They're looking for you in there," Leo said finally. "Your manager, the critics. They all want a piece of you." "I know," she said. She sounded calm, drained of all the earlier tension. I needed a minute first. She looked at him. Thank you, Leo. You don't have to thank me. You did the work. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. I played the notes yesterday. You showed me how to play the music tonight. There is a difference. She set her case down carefully. My manager just got a text from the nurse. My father was listening. When it was over, he cried. Her own eyes glittered with unshed tears in the yellow light. He hasn't been able to show much emotion since the stroke. But he cried. He heard me. Leo felt a lump form in his own throat. He looked down at his shoes. That's the only review that matters, he said, his voice rough. She nodded, wiping at her eyes with a quick finger. Yes. They stood in a comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant city sounds. What happens for you now? She asked. After this? Leo shrugged. The same. Next week, we have a program of Mozart. I'll be in the corner. But you shouldn't be, she said, with a sudden fierceness. People heard you tonight. They really heard you. Maybe, Leo said. But I like the corner. It's where I can listen. It's where I can do what I did tonight, when it's needed. Not everyone needs a spotlight to matter. She considered this, tilting her head. You're a strange man, Leo. A humble artist. I thought they were extinct. He gave a small laugh. Not extinct. Just quiet. The door burst open again, and her manager, a man with a worried, excited face, leaned out. Elena, there you are. The arts columnist from the Gazette is here, and the TV crew wants a quick word before they pack up. Coming, Elena said, her public face settling back into place, but softer now. She picked up her case. She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to Leo. My personal number, she said. If you are ever in the city, or if you ever need anything, or if you just want to talk about music. Not many people understand it like you do. Leo took the paper. It felt warm from her pocket. Thank you? And Leo? She said, one hand on the door. You weren't the backup tonight. You were the duet. She slipped back inside. Leaving him alone in the alley, with the faint sounds of the departing audience drifting from the front of the building. The next morning, Leo was back in the empty concert hall. Sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting up motes of dust in the air. It was his ritual after every performance, to come and collect his sheet music, to sit for a moment in the quiet. His piano was still in the corner, the bench pushed in. On the lid, someone had left a copy of the morning's newspaper. The art section was folded open. The headline read, Volkov Transcendent, but a local star steals the night from the shadows. Leo picked it up slowly. He read the review. It praised Elena's technical mastery, of course. But the heart of the article was about the second movement. The revelation of the evening, it said, was not the soloist, but the profound, wordless dialogue she shared with pianist Leo Marsh. Marsh, a longtime fixture of our community orchestra, provided not mere accompaniment, but the emotional landscape from which Volkov's genius could truly take flight. In their duet, we did not hear soloist and supporter. We heard two hearts in conversation. It was a masterclass in musical empathy, and a reminder that the most crucial voice in an ensemble is not always the loudest. Leo put the paper down. He ran his hand over the smooth wood of the piano. He didn't feel like a star. He felt like himself, a man who understood his place in the music. He sat on the bench and opened the fallboard. The keys stared back, black and white, waiting. He didn't play the concerto. He didn't play anything grand. He played the simple, winding folk tune Elena had hummed. He played it slowly, letting each note ring in the sunlit silence. He finished, and the last note faded into the empty hall. He closed the piano lid. He gathered his things. As he walked up the aisle toward the exit, he didn't look back at the stage. He didn't need to. The music was still there, hanging in the air. And for the first time, he knew that his part in it, the foundation, the anchor, the quiet duet in the shadows, was not a small thing. It was everything. It was what made the soloist shine, and what made the music true. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the morning. The city was going about its business. Cars honking, people walking. No one knew him. No one recognized the man in the simple coat carrying a bag of sheet music, and that was perfectly fine with him. He had been seen exactly when it mattered. He walked home, the memory of the music, and the shared look in a yellow-lit alley, warming him more than the sun ever could.